Hello and welcome back to Good Germs Off-Road Adventures and to the Stryker. Today I'm going to answer a question that literally somebody has asked. A viewer out there by @relevance has asked me if I've ever filmed installing the inverter and maybe the solar panels on this rig. He has the same unit, a year older, 2916, but it's the same. Well, the answer to that is no. I never filmed that because mainly when I did all of that, I had not yet decided to do this channel. But it might be helpful. So we're going to go ahead and do an overview of how I did all of those things, show you all the nitties and gritties and details of wiring and things like that. Of course, I'm not going to undo it all just so I can redo it all, you know, on camera. But I think I should be able to give a good enough overview. Hopefully it'll be useful to somebody, and especially hopefully it'll be useful to the viewer. Anyway, let's get into it. Stick around. So before we get too far into this video, I do want to explain, I'm not an expert, I'm not an electrician, I'm not a professional. Please, this is just showing you what I did in my rig. I'm not in no way giving you advice or telling you what you should do with your rig. I'm just showing you what I did and what seems to work for me and for my rig and for what we use. Okay, now having said all of that, on to the show. All right, hopefully this is, visible to all of you out there. I've gone ahead and drawn a very poorly thought out diagram of all of the things. A couple of things to note: anything that's the pink color is stuff that was already in the RV from the factory, and anything that's got blue is the things that I've added. So just really quickly, from the factory, you've got your 12-volt batteries, direct feed over to the generator. That's just to start it, nothing more. Okay. From the generator, you go to a junction box, which is inside the trailer. It's a silver box. We'll get to it when we get back in there and have a look. And it goes to the factory installed RV transfer switch. You also have the shore power, which is your, plug where you can plug it into power supply. It's 50 amp, also goes to the transfer switch. Generator is 30 amp on 2 poles. This is 50 amp on 2 poles, fine. From the transfer switch, then we go to the RV breaker panel, which this again is a 50 amp service. So you've got 2 50 amp poles and 2 50 amp circuits in that panel. From that panel, you then go to your 12 volt converter, which will convert obviously to 12 volt. That's why it's called a 12 volt converter. And then from there, you also have a line to the battery. I've got an arrow on both directions because it both charges the batteries and the batteries, come back. Maybe 2 directions, I don't know. Anyway, then you also have batteries to the 12 volt panel in the RV, which these 2 panels are physically connected, but they're not connected via, wires. Okay, so the first thing we did is we added solar panels. So solar panels on the roof to a 20 amp fuse. I'll come back to that 20 amp fuse in a minute. Then to a cutoff switch, which I added. You don't have to add that. I don't think it's necessary. I'm just a little crazy in the head, so I added a cutoff switch so I could disconnect the panels from the solar charger. Then solar charge controller. This goes to a 12 volt bus that I have added. And of course, we have batteries to this 12 volt bus that I added here. Now in doing this, I also severed the 12 volt batteries to the fuse panel, and I also run this to the 12 volt bus as well. I like that I can use the bus bars to then easily service things, disconnect, reconnect things, and I also severed this and ran this to the 12 volt bus. So that way we're using a bus bar for everything. Again, I can disconnect, reconnect things. It's good for troubleshooting, I think. If you need to see if something's working or not working, you can disconnect just that one device. It's also good if you need to just add things, subtract things. You just go to the bus and take care of it. I did also forget that right here, there is a cutoff switch that is installed by the factory. Sorry, that should have been pink and I forgot to put it on there, but there's a factory installed battery cutoff switch that disconnects the battery from the system. Now for the inverter. Well, let's go backwards. Let's start from the batteries. So from the batteries, we have 12 volt to another cutoff switch, so I can disconnect the inverter from the 12 volt battery system, which is probably pretty important. And then from here to a 250 amp fuse, and then from the fuse, obviously, to the inverter. Now, this junction box, you may remember from the 1-year review of the unit. This is the little silver box in the back, and I'll show it to you when we get into the rig here. But this is the box that had the connection that was very poorly done by the factory, and in my mind presented a fire hazard. So what we did here is we severed here, I don't want to say severed, we interrupted that connection. We added this transfer switch for the inverter. So now the generator goes here. Okay, stay with me. The inverter goes here. And now the inverter feeds into this junction box. So the generator is no longer connected here directly. It is connected to the inverter transfer switch that we added. The inverter is connected to that transfer switch. So these transfer switches, wherever it detects the power, in a simplified way, wherever it detects the power, that's what it will switch to keep from feeding power to the other device, and then to the junction box, and then down to the RV's internal transfer switch that came from the factory. I know that's 2 switches. Yeah, there's probably a little bit of voltage drop or amp loss or power loss, but it's going to be negligible. So anyway, this is a bit of a confusing loop. So battery, cutoff switch, 250 amp fused, inverter to transfer switch, generator to transfer switch to this silver junction box, down to the RV's transfer switch. And that allows us to switch between all 3 power sources pretty seamlessly, and then down to the breaker panel. Sorry for the interruption, viewers, but while editing I found a mistake in my diagram. The generator actually still goes into the silver junction box, while the inverter's transfer switch actually feeds directly to the RV's main transfer switch. Sorry for any confusion that is caused, and hopefully when you get to the part later where you actually see the things, it will make more sense. Okay, back to the show. I think that I've made this as confusing as possible, but it may make a little more sense when we go into the rig and check it out. Let's go and have a look at the system that we installed. We're going to start with the solar because it's the easiest one, and well, you know, it feeds the 12 volt directly. Okay, here we go to the trailer. All right, so I'm not going to actually go on the roof and show you the panels. They're just solar panels with an inline fuse. But you can see here, you have the vent for the refrigerator. So you just run the wires into there, inside the wall, and into your refrigerator, cavity there. And then what's nice about this rig is you've got right here, and I'll show you to this when we get in the inside, but right here you've got a cabinet with a little shelf on it, and that's where all of your electrical is. So it was really easy to pull those wires through, put a little hole here, and run the wires from the panels into this cabinet box here. Put a little bit of sealant there. Good idea to keep water out of your electrical box. But that's it on the outside for the solar. So now we're going to go inside and have a look at what we've done in there. Okay, so now that we've seen the outside for the solar panels. Yep, we put solar panels on this here rig. Anyway, we've looked at what we've done on the outside for the solar panels. I'll show you what we have on the inside here. Okay, so like I mentioned, this here, that's the refrigerator. And the furnace is actually under it, but here is our electrical panel for the rig, and they've got this cabinet here. Makes it really easy to access all of the wiring and everything you need. Obviously here is our solar controller, and down there is the cutoff switch that we added so we could disconnect the panels from the controller. Now, I did that because in my mind, if I'm plugging this thing into shore power, the converter is also charging the batteries. So I did not want this to try to charge the batteries at the same time as the converter from the panel. So that's the purpose of the switch. When we get to an RV park that has shore power, or if it's home and I have it plugged into the shore power, I can just disconnect the panels from this unit and it will keep any electricity from trying to flow back into this thing. It's just, I'm sure you don't have to do it. It's just something I thought in my mind would just give me a little bit of peace of mind. Okay. So inside here, obviously you have all of your breakers. You also have your 12 volt side of the panel, but the 12 volt side of the panel is connected to the batteries, not this actual setup. This will actually have a breaker for your converter. So now looking directly at the breaker panel, you'll see here I've got one where I labeled it 12 volt converter. So the reason that's labeled that way with the label that I made is because that breaker actually used to do the 12 volt converter and the water heater. So this rig, the water heater, is both a propane gas, and 110 electric. So you can switch between the two. I never ever plan on using the electric side of that. So there's a switch on the outside of the water heater, you can turn it off, but there's a power outlet under the sink, which is where it plugs in, because the water heater and this is under the sink. So there's a power outlet there, and it only does that. So what I did is unplugged it from that outlet, and then also disconnected that outlet from the panel. So getting back to the panel, I disconnected it from here. So now this breaker only does the converter. That's all this one does. And I'll try to explain why that's important. Okay, so we know what an inverter does. It takes 12 volt DC and it inverts it to 110 or 120, 110 volt AC. So think about the electrical system in the diagram that we had before that is hard to read that I made. So if you're feeding 12 volts to your 110 inverter, then you're feeding your 110 inverter to this panel that we're looking at right here. You're feeding it to this panel to power this panel, and then this panel then turns around and powers the 12 volt converter, which is used to charge the batteries, which are then sending electricity into the inverter that inverts it back to 110, that brings it back to the panel, back to the converter, back to the batteries. But you end up with a big loop, and what will happen very quickly is you will just kill the batteries. So it's important that when you are running your inverter, that this 12 volt converter is switched off. So I have a breaker dedicated to that. So before I turn the inverter on, I turn this breaker off, so that way I'm not trying to charge the batteries from its own power that's converted and then inverted and then converted again. And you get the picture. There is a way, I saw a guy on the YouTube, and I'll see if I can find the video. I'll link it below. There is a way to have that happen automatically. So when you switch your inverter on, you send a signal to another relay that then disconnects your converter from your batteries or from the panel. I can't remember how it goes. It's something I probably want to do it someday, but I'm just not really up for that right now, because that will require running a lead from the output side of the inverter. There's a couple of actual regular outlets on the inverter besides the hardwired outlets. That would require running a lead from there all the way up to the panel here, which would not be easy without pulling the floor panels out. And so I'm just not really up for that right now. What I mean by floor panels, I meant the underbelly, under the frame where it's sealed. You'd have to open that up to be able to run wires, and I'm not up for that. So it's something that maybe someday I want to do, but for now I'm pretty happy with just, before I turn the inverter on, I just come over here, turn this converter breaker off, and that way I don't have a problem. And then when I want to use the converter, say it's nighttime, and I want to run the generator and get 12 volts out of that to charge the batteries, whatever, I just make sure I turn this converter back on, and Bob's your uncle. Okay. So the other thing that I did not mention yet is the 12 volt bus bars. So they're behind here. I'm not going to take this out because this screws into the wood, and the more times you unscrew and rescrew, the wood may not survive after too many more times. Anyway, so what I did is on this exterior wall, because it's nice and solid, but inside I added both a 12 volt ground bar, negative, and a 12 volt positive bus bar. So they're bus bars, they're protected, and that way you can, disconnect or reconnect and do all the things that you want to do. So real quick, the brand of solar panels I used was the Renogy. It came with this nice big controller here. I did do the 400 watt system, so I've got 4 100 watt panels on the roof. So I mentioned earlier we'd come back to the 20 amp fuse that is on the panels, between the panels and the switch and the controller here. It came with a 10 amp fuse. But if you do the math, at full capacity at 400 watts, The output is going to be more than 10 amps because the voltage coming off those panels, you know, it could be pushing 20 volts potentially. So when you do the math, you end up with more than 10 amps. And I quickly discovered this because we had about a week or two, which the sun was just, it was doing the thing, and it was doing it proper. And I was pushing out, or not I, the panels were pushing out enough amps that it kept blowing the 10 amp fuse that came with it. So after doing some quick maths, and the wiring, which is 8 gauge, so it can handle a decent amount of, you know, watts, or, you know, voltage times amps, you know what I mean. It kept blowing the 10 amp fuse. I put it in and it would just blow. So I went ahead and put a 20 amp fuse after doing all the maths. Now, I'm not an electrician. I'm not certified to do anything, but when I do the math myself, 20 amp fuse was about perfect, and I have not had an issue with that thing blowing since. I also don't have an issue with anything getting hot, overpowered, smoking, catching fire. Wires are staying cool, so I think we're still in good shape there. But like I said, not a professional, not an expert, not certified in anything, not an electrician. I'm just your dude that does stuff on his own. Okay, disclaimer's over. Okay, so now all of that stuff is out of the way. Let's go look in the storage container and look at all of the things we did there. This video actually came at the perfect time, the request maybe to show how we did this. Perfect timing, because I've been meaning to clean out that storage compartment for quite a while, and now it gave me the perfect reason to do that. So a little bit of housekeeping while we're at making a video. Excellent. So originally I was actually going to crawl in there and try to lay down inside this compartment like I did when I was installing everything. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm just going to shove the camera in there and kind of talk to you. Okay. So you can see here what I used is a Renogy 2000 watt inverter. I decided to keep the same brand as the panels just because I like consistency. You can see in the back, right there, is the silver junction box. That is the box, like I mentioned earlier, that had the very poorly done wiring from the factory between the generator and the coach 110 wiring. Here you have the Furrion, whatever, transfer switch. This is for a 50 amp service, so you have a red, black, and a white in there, so 2 poles, right? Okay. And then you've got some fancy wire looms, the fuse, and a disconnect switch that I added. You can see I labeled it inverter disconnect, on off. So here's the key. You just put it in there and you turn it, and I loop it over here so it doesn't get turned on accidentally when not in use. Okay, you can see also that I've cut a hole here, and then I put some wood backers in there so I can reattach it. I just cut this with a razor knife, nothing fancy. It also doesn't make any dust or jagged edges, but you can pull wires up from the bottom. Well, here, let me show you. So behind my batteries, you've got your red and black here. That's your positive and negative. Going to the batteries, this is 0 gauge pure copper wire. I went ahead and made the, ordered however many feet it was, 6 feet or so, and then trimmed them down to fit. But they come directly off the battery bank that that I went ahead and made with the 4 batteries here. Back into the coach, I just was able to get inside here behind the frame, up under the sheeting, and that brings you quite nicely behind this panel. So cutting this square here gave me plenty of room to put in my switch, get the wires through, make my terminals. And then you can see the positive I brought through. I did put a nice grommet on there just because that seemed like a good thing to do. This is my 250 amp fuse here. And then you can see also the negative here as well, same thing. Okay, you also have a chassis ground that you have to connect. Yes, okay. On this side of the inverter is where you have all your outputs. Here's some regular outlets, and here's your hard wire here. Now notice this is only 2 pole, so you have your neutral or your common and your hot. But we know we're in a 50 amp system here, which has 3. So I'm going to show you what I did, which means I'm going to have to crawl up inside here to show you how I managed that. Oh boy, here we go. Before I do that though, from here we go into the transfer switch at the top. From the generator, you can see the gray conduit comes out, goes into the transfer switch at the bottom. and then the coach power goes out of the transfer switch and back inside the coach. Give me a minute while I crawl in here so I can show you inside that transfer switch box there and show you how I put that together and kind of explain a little bit on that. Yeah, I was hoping I would never have to crawl back in there again, but you know what? In the sake of making a decent video, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Okay, here we go. Too old for this. Okay, well, you can see I've made it in here. I'm quite uncomfortable, but this shows you, that it's a good sized storage compartment. I'm 6'4", and I fit in here quite nice once I'm in here. No, that's a lie. Anyway, let me show you what we've got going on in here. Okay, so first you can see from the back of the inverter, ran the nice conduit wire, and this is 10 gauge wire. And then of course we have coming off the generator, the same thing, 10 gauge wire. The wires off the generator from the factory are also 10 gauge, so we match pretty nicely. Okay, so now I'm going to pull this panel off. I think. This cover. Give me a minute. Okay, well, it helps if you read. It says open here. Before I do, though, you can see it tells you what to do. It's pretty simple. The instructions are on it. Generator, shore power. So I'm treating the inverter like shore power. I'm treating the generator like it's a generator. Go figure. Line out, that's to the coach. Okay, and it says red, white, black. Red, white, black. Red, white, black. But it also says open here. So it's amazing. You can actually open it from there. Okay. Now that we're in here, you can see that we had to split everything up. Let's start with the generator, and I'm going to stand this panel up here so I can remind myself which is where. So the generator, red, white, black. So that's here. Don't worry, everything's off. Before I touch anything, it's fine. We're all turned off. Nothing's plugged in. Nothing 110 is running. Okay. Red, white, black. That's from the generator. Perfect. Line out. This is to the coach. Red, white, black. Now, you'll notice this is upside down. It doesn't matter. Red and black are the same thing. It doesn't matter which color. It's just the way it fit. It's fine. Okay. But you can also see this internal loop right here. That was part of the transfer switch. That's fine. That came from the factory on the transfer switch, so we didn't do that. Then down here, we have the feed from the inverter. So from the inverter, remember, we don't have red, white, black. We only have white, black. So here's our black, here's our white, which is the neutral and or common, whichever way you prefer to call it. But then we also have a loop coming from here to tie these two hots together. Now, I know that probably seems sketchy, but here's the thing. So the thing is, we're not going to power the air conditioners. Okay, so each air conditioner on the breaker panel, if you noticed it earlier, I didn't mention it, but if you've noticed it or go back, you can see it again. You have 2 breakers for the air conditioner. Because you have 2 air conditioners on this rig, but that panel split in half. So one half the panel is coming from one side, the other half's coming from the other side. But besides the air conditioners, nothing else in this rig pulls a lot of power. Even the microwave only pulls, I think, max like 11 amps. It's not even that big, that heavy of a load. So by doing this loop, as long as we don't ever try to fire the air conditioners, we don't have a problem. However, if we did try to fire the air conditioners, all that's going to happen is the system's just going to shut down. And we know this because, it may have happened or maybe not. Just saying. So anyway, tying those together isn't a risk. I did do a lot of personal research on that, got some expert advice from actual electricians, and did confirm that coming from the inverter, doing that is not a problem as long as we don't try to pull too much. But we also know the inverter will shut down. It has protection on it. So even though that has happened, yeah, I'll admit to it, where we've tried to fire the air conditioners forgetting that the inverter was what was powering it, not the generator. All it does is go click, 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 and shuts itself down. So good on Renogy for doing some things in there to keep us safe. Okay, and lastly, for under here, you can see we've got the wire. This is just to the remote switch, and you can see what I did is I just ran it across the top of the underside of this, whatever, it's inside here, and through there, and I'll show you where that comes out. All right, if we come into the bedroom here, on this left side of the bed, which is the same side as you can see the generator controls are up there. Why do you do that? I don't know why they do that. Anyway, left side of the bed, we have an outlet already, but I was able to just come, like you saw out of that box, run that wire through here, cut a hole, again with just a razor knife, nothing fancy, and this is the remote for the inverter. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you how the thing works. So I've already turned on the disconnect switch, or switched it to on. Is that reconnect? Is that reconnect if it's on, or is that reconnect the disconnect switch? I turned it to on to connect the batteries back to the inverter. Okay. So I'm just going to turn this on. You'll hear it beep, and you'll hear a thud come from under here. That is the transfer switch in the storage compartment switching over. And there it is. There was your thud. It's not a big thud, but it's a thud. And now that that's on, the main transfer switch needs to wait for some time where it's going to detect clean, good power, and then it's going to switch. And when that happens, the microwave will beep. So now we're just watching here, waiting for the thud to happen. Oh, there it is. Hopefully you caught that. There's the thud, and you heard the beeps, everything switching over. Oh, but you realize I forgot something. That. Forgot to turn the converter off. Maybe someday I'll do the relay to turn that off. So clearly we know that we have, power because the microwave is, powered up. But with this 2000 watt system, it'll run the microwave. Let me show you. Let's just put it on popcorn and start. We're running the microwave off the batteries. Now we do have the solar thing going. Look, you can see me in the reflection. That's pretty neat. Anyway, we do have the solar panels on, but we're running the microwave off the inverter. And if I look at my current volts, they're sitting at 12.5, which is not 100%. But look, if you need to make some popcorn, microwave something up real quick, this works perfectly fine. You run it for a couple of minutes, good to go. Okay, is there a clear button? Yep, reset. Okay. So like I said, you wouldn't want to run the microwave for a whole lot of time, but if you're just going to do something really quick with that inverter, this battery bank, it works. All right, so now I'm going to switch the inverter off, and you're going to hear a thud as these transfer switches all turn off. Perfect. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. Just a quick little video answering a question that literally somebody has asked. I appreciate you watching. If you have any more questions on this or just want to yell at me for doing things that are not too bright, go ahead and put them in the comments. It's all good. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. Make sure you do the whole like and subscribe. That really means a lot to me when people do that. It does, I promise. In the meantime, I guess we'll just see you later. Bye-bye now.